The invisible wife's grand entrance. She was publicly humiliated by her husband and sister. Now, she's using the same stage to claim her ultimate victory. The deafening silence that fell over the Victoria and Albert Museum, V&A, chilled everyone to the bone. They watched in horror as a man walked through the main doors, hand in hand with another woman. Not just any woman, but his own sister-in-law. But what Celeste Dupont did next shocked all of London's high society and changed her life forever. This is the true story of a betrayal that unfolded in front of 300 people, and how one woman turned the greatest humiliation of her life into her greatest victory. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to discover will leave you speechless from start to finish. A real story of revenge, dignity, and rebirth that took place on the most elegant streets of London. Part 1. The Promise. Celeste Dupont always believed she was born to shine. At 32, she commanded one of the most respected haute couture boutiques in Mayfair. Her shop, Atelier Celeste, occupied a 3-story Georgian building with large windows that reflected the golden light of the London sunset onto the exclusive creations displayed in the windows. Born into an upper-middle-class family in Manchester, Celeste always showed an exceptional talent for design and a sharp eye for business. Her mother, a literature professor, and her father, a renowned architect, invested in their eldest daughter's education, convinced that she was destined for great things. They weren't wrong. After graduating from the London College of Fashion, Celeste worked for 5 years as an assistant to some of the biggest names in French haute couture. She learned the secrets of the finest fabrics, mastered cutting techniques that transformed simple yards of silk into works of art, and developed a network of contacts that included everyone from traditional seamstresses to London's most influential socialites. At 27, with her savings and a courageous loan, she opened Atelier Celeste. What started as a small studio in a back alley quickly turned into a fashion empire. Her creations were sought after by diplomats' wives, film actresses, and heiresses of centuries-old fortunes. Celeste had the rare gift of capturing the essence of each client and translating it into unique pieces that highlighted not only their physical beauty, but also their personality and power. It was during a charity fashion show at the Royal Academy of Arts that Celeste met Lucien Girard. He wasn't there as a fashion enthusiast, but as the financial director of one of London's largest investment firms. At 30, Lucien had everything society considered desirable: a brilliant career, a spectacular apartment with a view of the Thames, a Mercedes-Benz he drove through the cobbled streets of Notting Hill, and a natural charm that made people feel special in his presence. Lucien knew nothing about fashion, but immediately understood that Celeste was different from all the women he had ever met. She wasn't intimidated by his social standing, or easily impressed by expensive restaurants or luxurious gifts. Instead, she challenged him intellectually, talked about art with a passion he had never felt for anything, and had a financial and emotional independence that deeply intrigued him. Their courtship lasted 2 years of pure intensity. Lucien would show up at the atelier in the late afternoon after his meetings in Canary Wharf and watch Celeste work. He fell in love not just with her, but with her world, with the way her hands created beauty from nothing, with the dedication she showed each client, with the respect she had earned in a male-dominated industry with centuries-old traditions. They married in an intimate ceremony at Blenheim Palace, just 60 miles from London. It was a fairy tale wedding with only 50 of their closest guests, in a setting that seemed straight out of a storybook. Celeste wore a creation of her own, a dress that took 3 months to finish, with 19th century French lace she had found in an antique shop in a small English village. The honeymoon was in Tuscany, 2 weeks spent touring vineyards and small medieval towns. Lucien photographed Celeste in every village, in every sunset, as if he wanted to eternalize that happiness forever. Back in London, the couple's life settled into a perfect routine. They lived in a 120-square-meter apartment in the city center, with 2 balconies that overlooked an internal courtyard filled with ancient trees. Mornings began with coffee and croissants in bed as they planned their day's commitments. Lucien would leave first, always in an impeccable suit, kissing Celeste on the forehead before heading down the marble stairs of the elegant Georgian building. Celeste, in turn, would arrive at her atelier around 9 in the morning and work until early evening. Her business was prospering extraordinarily. She had hired 6 employees, expanded to the upper floor of the building, and was being sought after by clients from other European countries. There were weeks when she couldn't keep up with all the orders. Such was the demand for her creations. The couple's evenings were magical. They would dine at small bistros hidden in the alleys of Soho, see plays at the historic West End theaters, or simply walk along the banks of the Thames, talking about everything and nothing. Lucien had a gift for making Celeste laugh until she cried, and she had the ability to make him see beauty in details he had never noticed. In the way the afternoon light illuminated the stained glass windows of St. Paul's Cathedral, in the sound of high heels echoing in the subway corridors, in the elegance of Londoners having coffee on the small balconies of corner cafes. Weekends were even better. They would wake up late, read the newspapers in bed, explore the flea markets of Portobello Road in search of interesting antiques, or simply stay home, cooking elaborate meals while listening to 1960s British jazz. Lucien had become an expert in wines, and Celeste discovered a hidden talent for traditional British cuisine. It was a life many people dreamed of, but few managed to build. There was a genuine harmony between them, a complicity that went far beyond physical passion. They were best friends, adventure partners, confidants of fears and dreams. Celeste felt she had found not just a husband, but a life partner in the deepest sense of the word. Part 2. The Silent Storm. Celeste's family adored Lucien. Her parents welcomed him like a son, and he returned the affection with a genuine dedication. He always remembered birthdays, brought flowers to his mother-in-law, and discussed architecture with his father-in-law for hours. But it was with Mireille, Celeste's younger sister, that Lucien seemed to have a special connection. Mireille was 20 and pursuing a doctorate in art history at Oxford. She was different from Celeste in almost every way. Where the older sister was practical and entrepreneurial, Mireille was a dreamer and an intellectual. Where Celeste had a natural and discreet elegance, Mireille cultivated a bolder, more artistic style. She lived in a small flat in Camden Town, surrounded by books and art reproductions, surviving on her small scholarship and occasional help from her parents. Lucien always offered to help Mireille with practical matters, her tax return, problems with her apartment landlord, guidance on future investments. Celeste saw this as her husband's natural generosity, an extension of the love he felt for her. After all, Mireille was her younger sister, almost like a daughter to her, and Celeste had always taken on a protective role in the family. During family dinners, Lucien and Mireille would discuss art and philosophy with a passion that impressed everyone. He had started visiting museums more often, reading books on artistic movements, clearly influenced by his conversations with his sister-in-law. Celeste was proud to see her husband open up to new experiences, expanding his intellectual horizons. There were a few moments when Celeste noticed lingering glances between Lucien and Mireille, conversations that would stop abruptly when she approached, and overly intimate laughter during family lunches. But she dismissed these perceptions as unjustified paranoia. Lucien loved her in a way she never doubted, and Mireille was her sister, a sweet, naive girl who would never be capable of such a betrayal. Life continued its perfect course until the invitation arrived that would change everything forever. The annual gala of the Anglo-Italian Cultural Foundation was to be held at the V&A, one of the most prestigious events on the London social calendar. Lucienne had received the invitation through an important client and was radiant with the opportunity to attend such an exclusive event. "It will be the perfect night to show everyone how happy we are," he said, kissing Celeste on the neck as she examined the hand-embroidered invitation. The ball was in 2 weeks, enough time for her to create a special dress for the occasion. It would be the night she would shine alongside the man she loved in the most romantic city in the world, surrounded by the European cultural elite. Celeste couldn't have imagined that she was about to experience the greatest humiliation of her life in front of 300 people, in the place where she felt most confident and powerful. What she thought would be the crowning of her happiness would turn into the beginning of a journey of pain that would test every fiber of her inner strength. Part 3. The Public Betrayal. The preparation for the gala consumed 2 whole weeks of Celeste's life. She decided to create not just a dress, but a work of art that represented everything she had achieved. She spent entire nights in her atelier, designing and experimenting with fabrics, adjusting every detail with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. The V&A, with its majestic Victorian architecture, is one of London's most beautiful buildings. Its intricate stone carvings and stunning glass ceiling created a simultaneously grand and ethereal atmosphere. On the night of the ball, the venue was transformed into a fairy tale setting. Imported crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, creating golden reflections that danced off the marble walls. Celeste arrived at the V&A at 8 o'clock, punctually as always. Her dress was a spectacular creation, a piece of Italian silk with handcrafted embroidery that had taken over 40 hours to complete. Every stitch had been sewn by hand, following traditional techniques she had learned from the most experienced seamstresses in London. The result was a piece that seemed to float around her body, highlighting her natural elegance without ostentation. She waited for Lucienne at the main entrance, watching the guests arrive in their luxury cars. Mercedes, BMWs, and a few Rolls-Royces paraded down Cromwell Road, dropping off impeccably dressed passengers. The London elite was all there: diplomats, businessmen, renowned artists, and heirs of old fortunes. Celeste recognized some familiar faces, clients of her atelier, people who admired her work. 8:15, 8:30. At 9 o'clock, Celeste started to worry. Lucienne was obsessively punctual, a trait she had always admired in him. In their 3 years together, he had never been late for an important engagement. She called his cell phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. A strange feeling began to form in her stomach, but she tried to push it away. Maybe there was some traffic, maybe a work emergency. At 9:15, she decided to go inside alone. There was no point in wasting the whole night waiting outside. Lucienne would surely show up soon, and they would meet in the main hall. She showed her invitation at the entrance, received a respectful greeting from the security guards who recognized her name, and entered the V&A. The interior was even more stunning than she had imagined. The main hall, with its 100-foot-high ceiling, had been decorated with monumental floral arrangements: roses imported from Ecuador, Dutch lilies, Thai orchids. Round tables scattered throughout the space accommodated groups of 8 people each, all covered with French linen tablecloths and decorated with crystals that reflected the light from the chandeliers. A chamber orchestra played Vivaldi on a stage set up especially for the event. The musicians, dressed in impeccable tuxedos, created an atmosphere of timeless elegance that transported the guests to an era of absolute glamour and sophistication. The sound of violins echoed through the building's iron structure, mixing with the murmur of conversations in English, French, Italian, and German. Celeste circulated through the hall, greeting acquaintances, introducing herself to new people, always keeping an eye on the main entrance. She knew this environment. These were the same people who attended fashion shows, art auctions, and theater premieres. Many women complimented her dress. Some asked if she would accept commissions for similar events. Professionally, the night was a success, but Lucienne's absence was becoming increasingly unsettling. At 10 o'clock, she tried to call again. Voicemail. She sent text messages. No response. A dull anxiety began to grow in her chest, a feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. It was then, at 10:20, that the conversations in the hall began to gradually cease. A strange murmur took over the room, as if a shockwave were spreading through the groups of guests. Celeste had her back to the entrance, talking to the wife of an Italian diplomat. When she realized that all eyes were directed to a point behind her, she turned around slowly, and what she saw made her heart stop for a full 5 seconds. Lucienne was entering the V&A, in an impeccable tuxedo as always, with the same natural elegance she knew so well. But he wasn't alone. Holding his hand, wearing a dress that Celeste recognized immediately, because she herself had chosen the fabric and supervised the cut, was Mireille, her younger sister. Her Mireille, the girl she had protected since childhood, whom she had helped with money during the difficult university years, whom she had hugged like a daughter in all the important moments of their lives. Mireille was different. Her hair, normally loose and natural, was styled in a sophisticated bun. She was wearing jewelry Celeste had never seen before, diamond earrings and a pearl necklace that looked like it cost more than a middle-class family's annual income. But the most shocking thing was her expression. There was no guilt, no shame. There was triumph. There was an almost cruel satisfaction as she walked through the main hall, hand in hand with Lucienne, in front of 300 people who knew Celeste. The silence in the V&A was deafening. The orchestra had stopped playing. The waiters stopped serving champagne. All conversations ceased. 300 pairs of eyes alternated between Celeste, paralyzed in the center of the hall, and the couple who had just made the most shocking entrance that the London elite had witnessed in decades. Lucienne saw Celeste and did not look away. He showed no embarrassment, did not let go of Mireille's hand, did not give any sign of remorse. Instead, he greeted her with a nod, as if they were meeting casually at a cafe, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Mireille smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile, but one that Celeste caught perfectly. It was a smile of victory, of someone who had conquered exactly what they wanted, in the way they planned, at the moment they chose. There was no innocence in that smile. There was calculation. There was coldness. There was a cruelty that Celeste had never imagined her younger sister was capable of nurturing. The humiliation was physical. Celeste felt the blood rush to her face, her hands start to tremble, her stomach violently contract. She was in the center of London's most prestigious hall, wearing a creation that had taken her weeks to finish, surrounded by people who respected her work and reputation, experiencing the complete destruction of her personal life in front of an audience of 300 people. Some women began to whisper among themselves. The men looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Celeste could feel the mix of compassion and morbid curiosity emanating from the guests. She had become, in a matter of seconds, the center of a scandal that would be talked about in London's salons for months. Lucienne and Mireille walked toward a table on the opposite side of the hall, greeting a few people along the way. They behaved like an established couple, as if they had every right to be there together, as if Celeste were an irrelevant figure in their lives. The naturalness with which they carried themselves made everything even crueler. There was no drama, No explanations, just the public presentation of a new reality. Celeste remained motionless for long minutes, processing what was happening. 3 years of marriage, 6 years of a relationship, a lifetime of trust in her younger sister. Everything crumbling in a matter of seconds, in the most public and humiliating way possible. The wife of the Italian diplomat, who had witnessed everything, gently touched Celeste's arm. "Darling, are you okay? Do you want me to call someone?" Her voice was kind, but Celeste could sense the curiosity behind the concern. That woman would have an incredible story to tell for weeks. "I'm fine," Celeste managed to murmur, although she was far from it. "Excuse me." She walked toward this lady's room, trying to maintain her composure, feeling the eyes of everyone present glued to her back. Each step seemed like an eternity. Her legs trembled, and she had to concentrate intensely not to trip over the dress she had created with so much care. In the restroom, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman standing there. Her face was pale, her eyes looked glazed, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. In 15 minutes, she had become a tragic figure, the woman publicly betrayed, abandoned by her husband and her sister, transformed into an object of pity and curiosity. She tried to call Lucienne again, knowing it was pointless. Voicemail. She sent a message to Mireille. "We need to talk." The response came immediately. "There's nothing to talk about. You already understand everything." Celeste read the message 3 times before she could process the coldness of the words. Her younger sister, the girl she had protected and loved unconditionally, was there, just a few feet away, celebrating the destruction of her life as if it were a personal conquest. She remained in the restroom for 20 minutes, trying to find the strength to go out, to face those 300 pairs of eyes again, to decide how to react to the most humiliating situation of her life. When she finally looked in the mirror one last time, she made a decision that would change everything. She would not run away. She would not hide. She would not give Lucien and Mireille the satisfaction of seeing her publicly fall apart. Celeste straightened her dress, reapplied her makeup, and took a deep breath. She was a woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had earned the respect of the London elite with hard work and dedication, who had survived challenges far greater than this. And if they wanted a war, she would give them exactly what they were asking for. When Celeste walked out of the restroom, she was a different woman. The pain was still there, sharp as a blade, but something new was mixed with it. A cold fury she had never felt before. Her steps were firm, her posture straight, her gaze determined. If Lucienne and Mireille wanted to make this a public spectacle, she would give them an ending they would never forget. She walked directly to the table where the couple was sitting, accompanied by 6 other people who were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The conversation stopped as she approached. Lucienne looked up, and for the first time since he had entered the V&A, she saw a shadow of uncertainty on his face. "Lucienne," she said, her voice calm and controlled. "Can we talk in private?" He hesitated for a moment, looked at Mireille, who maintained her defiant expression, and then stood up. "Of course," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They walked to a more secluded area of the hall, near the huge windows that looked out onto the illuminated Cromwell Road. The light from the crystal chandeliers created golden reflections on both their faces, a cruel irony considering the destruction that was happening between them. 3 years, was the first thing Celeste said. 3 years of marriage, 6 of a relationship, and you choose to humiliate me like this in front of all these people?" Lucienne sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she knew well. It was what he did when he was nervous, when he knew he had done something wrong but didn't know how to explain it. "Celeste, I didn't plan for it to be this way. Things just happened." "Happened?" Her voice rose a notch, but still controlled. "With my sister, in my face, The most important event of the year. Things don't just happen, Lucien. They are chosen. He looked down, finally showing some embarrassment. I know you can't understand now, but what Mireille and I have it's different. It's deeper. It's intellectual, spiritual. Celeste laughed. It was a short, bitter laugh that cut through the air like a whip. Intellectual? Spiritual? You're leaving me for discussions about art history and cheap college philosophy? It's not like that. He tried to explain, but his words sounded weak even to him. You don't understand. You only care about your work, your sewing, your fabrics. Mireille makes me think, makes me grow. I made you grow for 6 years, Lucien. I supported you. I loved you. I built a life with you. And you're trading me for my 25-year-old sister because she makes you feel intellectual. Celeste was keeping her calm, but inside, a storm was brewing. You're pathetic. That's when Mireille approached. She had stood up from the table and walked over to them, with that same cruel smile Celeste had seen before. Sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice as sweet as ever, but with a coldness Celeste had never heard before. But I think it's better to clear things up once and for all. Celeste turned to her sister, and in that moment, she understood that everything had been planned. The way Mireille had approached Lucien over the previous months, the intimate conversations, the glances she had noticed but chosen to ignore. It hadn't been a sudden passion or a lapse in judgment. It had been a calculated and cold campaign. You, Celeste whispered, the realization hitting her like a punch to the stomach. You planned this? Since when? Since when did you decide to destroy my life? Mireille shrugged with a shocking naturalness. I didn't destroy anything, Celeste. I just showed Lucien what he was missing by staying with you, a woman obsessed with work who has no time for the things that really matter in life. The important things? Celeste felt the fury rising in her throat. I built an empire, Mireille. I have a respected career, clients all over Europe. And you? You're a 25-year-old student who lives off her parents' help. And now I live with a man who truly loves me, Mireille retorted, wrapping her arm through Lucien's in a possessive gesture. A man who understands that there's more to life than sewing and dresses. Celeste looked at Lucien, hoping he would say something, that he would show at least a little remorse. But he just stood there, allowing his sister-in-law, now his mistress, to speak for him, to further destroy what was left of their 3 years together. What you want to do now is get a public victory, a complete and definitive humiliation, Celeste thought to herself, observing the surreal scene she was living. Because I need all the strength in the world not to do something crazy right now. It was in that moment that she realized they were being watched, not just by the guests nearby, but by people who had stood up from their tables to witness the confrontation. The London elite was watching what would undoubtedly be the biggest social scandal of the year. And Celeste understood that this was exactly what Mireille wanted. A public victory. You want a show? Celeste asked, her voice now louder, addressing not just the couple, but everyone present. Then I'm going to give you the best show you've ever seen. She stepped away from Lucien and Mireille, walked to the center of the main hall, and did something no one expected. She requested the orchestra's attention. Excuse me, she said, her voice echoing through the V&A. The music stopped. All conversation ceased. 300 people turned to her. I would like to make an announcement. Lucien tried to approach, clearly alarmed. Celeste, don't! No, don't worry, darling, she said, her voice sweet as honey, but with a deadly venom underneath. I'm not going to make a scene. Quite the opposite. She positioned herself right in the center of the hall, under the largest crystal chandelier, and smiled. It was a radiant, confident smile that confused everyone present. It wasn't the behavior they expected from a betrayed woman. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice clear and firm, echoing through the V&A's iron structure. Many of you know me. I'm Celeste Dupont, owner of Atelier Celeste. Some of you wear my creations. Others have heard of my work. Murmurs of approval echoed through the hall. Several women nodded, recognizing her. Tonight, you witnessed something that could be seen as a personal tragedy. My husband arrived at this event with my younger sister, a situation that I imagine will be talked about in London's salons for weeks. The silence was absolute. Not even the sound of the waiter's high heels could be heard. But I would like you to see this from a different perspective. This is not the story of a destroyed woman. It is the story of a woman set free. Her voice gained strength and resonance. For 6 years, I believed I was building a future with a man who loved me. My whole life, I believed I had a sister who respected me. Tonight, I discovered that I was wrong in both cases. Celeste began to walk slowly through the hall, as if she were giving a lecture to a select audience. Her posture was majestic. Her confidence grew with every word. But you know what else? I am grateful. I am grateful for discovering the truth here today in the clearest way possible. Because now I know exactly who I was sharing my life with. And now I can make the right decisions. She stopped right in front of the table where Lucienne and Mireille were sitting, both pale as ghosts. Lucienne, all these years, you made me believe you loved me. But a man who loves does not publicly humiliate the woman he married. A man who loves does not build secret relationships behind her back. A man who loves has the courage to end things before starting with someone else. Lucienne tried to say something, but she raised her hand, silencing him. And Mireille, she turned to her sister, you, whom I raised like a daughter, whom I supported in every difficult moment, whom I loved unconditionally. You taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, that sometimes the people we consider family are the ones who betray us the most, and that naivety comes at a very high price. Mireille had completely lost her arrogant composure. Her hands were trembling, and she avoided looking directly at Celeste. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a night of mourning. It is a night of rebirth, because from now on, I know exactly who I am, who truly loves me, and what kind of people I should keep away from my life. Celeste walked back to the center of the hall, radiating a strength that magnetized everyone present. Like this video, if you believe a woman can turn the worst night of her life into the beginning of her greatest victory. So, she continued, her voice now vibrant with determination, I want you all to be witnesses to my new beginning. Lucienne and Mireille, you can have the life you chose. But I would be very surprised if you found that building happiness on someone else's misery is a very fragile foundation. She paused dramatically, looking directly at the couple. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to continue enjoying this wonderful evening, because I have just freed myself from the biggest prison of my life, the illusion that I was surrounded by people who truly loved me. An even deeper silence fell over the V&A. And then, something completely unexpected happened. A woman started to applaud, then another. In a few seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, applauding Celeste with an intensity that made the crystals of the chandeliers vibrate. It was applause of admiration, of courage, of recognition that they had witnessed not the destruction of a woman, but her rebirth before their very eyes. Celeste smiled, gave a small bow, and walked elegantly toward the exit. Each step was firm, confident, and powerful. She didn't look back once. She didn't need to. She knew she had left Lucienne and Mireille exactly where they deserved to be. Alone, at the center of a scandal they had created themselves, while she walked toward freedom, outside the V&A, breathing the fresh London night air. Celeste finally allowed the tears to come. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of liberation, of a woman who had just discovered a strength within her that she didn't know she possessed. She looked at the illuminated Cromwell Road, at the city that had been the stage of her happiness and her greatest humiliation, and she knew that that night marked not the end of her story, but the beginning of a completely new chapter. A chapter she would write alone, her way, with her own rules. And for the first time in hours, Celeste truly smiled, because she understood that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover exactly what you are capable of. Part 5. The Phoenix of Haute Couture. 3 months after the gala, London woke up to an exceptional spring morning. The sun filtered through the trees lining Avenue Montaigne, creating patterns of golden light in the windows of the city's most exclusive boutiques. It was one of those mornings that make Londoners believe their city really is the most beautiful in the world. Celeste was in her new office, a space 3 times larger than the previous one, occupying the entire ground floor of a Georgian building on Bond Street. The change hadn't just been physical. It represented a complete transformation in her view of business and life. The walls, now painted a sophisticated ivory, displayed black and white photographs of her creations, each signed by London's most renowned photographers. The night at the V&A had become, against all expectations, the turning point that catapulted her career to a completely new level. In the days following the ball, Celeste was sought after by journalists, fashion bloggers, and even a documentary filmmaker interested in telling her story. But she refused all interviews. She didn't want to be known as the woman betrayed at the V&A. She wanted to be recognized for what she had always been, an exceptional artist and a visionary entrepreneur. What she did was even smarter. She channeled all the unexpected attention into her work. A week after the ball, she launched a limited collection called Renaissance, 12 unique pieces that told the story of historical women who had overcome extraordinary adversity. Each dress was a work of art, inspired by figures like Jane Austen, Amelia Earhart, Marie Curie, and Coco Chanel. The collection sold out in 6 hours. 6 hours. Women from all over Europe called desperately trying to acquire one of the pieces. The waiting list exceeded 300 names in a week. Celeste realized she had created something much more than clothes. She had created symbols of female power. But the real revolution happened when she made a decision that shocked even her closest employees. She decided to expand internationally. Not gradually, as would be prudent, but aggressively and immediately. She opened ateliers in Paris, Milan, and New York simultaneously. She hired the best seamstresses in each city, created partnerships with local suppliers, and established a distribution network that allowed deliveries to any major European city in less than 72 hours. The international fashion press began to call her the Phoenix of Haute Couture. British Vogue dedicated 8 pages to an essay on her career. LUK put her on the cover. Harper's Bazaar wrote an article titled, "The Woman Who Turned Humiliation into an Empire." But Celeste knew that professional success was only one side of her rebuilding. The real battle was being fought inside her, in the painful and necessary process of relearning who she was when she wasn't defined by the relationships she had lost. The first few days after the ball had been devastating. She had returned to the apartment she had shared with Lucienne, a space that now seemed contaminated by 3 years of lies. Every object told a story she had discovered to be false. The photographs from their Tuscany honeymoon, where he had photographed her with such affection. The art books he had started collecting, clearly influenced by his conversations with Mireille. The flowers he brought every Friday, which she now realized were an automatic gesture, without genuine love behind them. For 2 weeks, Celeste had lived like a ghost in her own home. She would wake up in the morning, momentarily forgetting what had happened, and then reality would hit her like a runaway train. Lucienne had moved into a new apartment with Mireille, a loft that cost more than he earned in 6 months. Clearly, Mireille had found not just a lover, but a provider willing to go into debt to keep her in the lifestyle she desired. Celeste's family had been divided. Her parents were devastated, especially her mother, who couldn't understand how her youngest daughter could have been capable of such cruelty. Her father tried to remain neutral, but Celeste could see the contained anger in his eyes whenever Mireille's name was mentioned. Some cousins and aunts took Mireille's side, arguing that the heart has no rules and that these things happen. Others broke with the younger sister completely, considering her betrayal unforgivable. It was during one of those dark mornings that Celeste made the decision that would change everything. She was sitting in the apartment kitchen, drinking coffee alone for the 15th consecutive morning, when she looked at the mirror Lucienne had installed on the opposite wall. The woman she saw there was not who she wanted to be. She was too thin, pale, with deep dark circles under her eyes. She looked like a faded version of herself. "Enough," she said out loud, to no one but herself. "Enough of living like a victim." That same day, she called a real estate agent and put the apartment up for sale. She called a divorce lawyer and started the separation process. She called a moving company and scheduled the removal of all her personal belongings. In 48 hours, she had physically eliminated all traces of her life with Lucienne. The new apartment she chose was completely different from the previous one. It was in Mayfair, near Hyde Park, in a 1920s Art Deco building. It was smaller than the previous one, but infinitely more elegant. It had large windows that looked out onto an internal courtyard filled with century-old magnolias, original parquet floors, and a marble fireplace that worked perfectly. Celeste decorated the space as a celebration of her independence. Every piece of furniture was chosen by her, for her. There were no compromises with anyone else's taste. The living room had velvet armchairs in an emerald tone, a glass and steel coffee table, and bookshelves filled with books on art, fashion, and biographies of extraordinary women. The bedroom was a sanctuary of tranquility, with French linen bedding, a closet that displayed her own creations like works of art, and a vintage vanity where she spent part of her mornings preparing to conquer the day. But the real transformation happened when she decided to invest in herself in ways she had never considered before. She hired a personal trainer who visited her 3 times a week. She started piano lessons, something she had always wanted to do but never found the time for. She enrolled in a course on art history at Oxford, ironically, the same university where Mireille was doing her doctorate. It was not a coincidence. It was a silent declaration that she would not be intimidated or change her life because of others. The most surprising thing was discovering how interesting she was when she was alone with herself. During her years with Lucienne, she had largely defined herself as his wife. Her conversations, her weekend plans, even her culinary preferences had been influenced by his tastes. Now, rediscovering herself, she realized she liked experimental jazz, Iranian films, and long walks through London's historic cemeteries. She liked to wake up early and have breakfast while reading philosophy books. She liked to spend entire Sundays visiting smaller museums, discovering unknown artists. The solitude, which at first was painful, gradually transformed into freedom. She could have dinner whenever she wanted, wherever she wanted, with whomever she wanted, or alone, which was often the best company. She could travel impulsively to Paris or Milan to visit suppliers, or simply because she felt like it. She could work late without worrying about anyone else, or take a day off to do absolutely nothing without having to justify it. It was during one of these impulsive trips, this time to Milan, to visit her new atelier. that Celeste had the encounter that would seal her complete transformation. She was having dinner alone in a small restaurant in the Brera district, one of Milan's most charming neighborhoods, known for its art galleries and bohemian atmosphere. The place was discreet, frequented mostly by locals, with small tables lit by candles and walls decorated with works by emerging artists. It was then that a man approached her table. "Excuse me," he said in English, with an Italian accent. "You're Celeste Dupont, aren't you?" She looked up and saw a man of about 40, well-dressed, but without ostentation, with dark, intelligent eyes and a genuinely interested smile. "I am," she replied, preparing for another encounter with someone from the fashion world. "I'm Alistair Cross," he introduced himself. "Contemporary art curator. I read about your work in Italian Vogue. Your creations are absolutely extraordinary." What followed was a 3-hour conversation about art and creativity, and the intersection between fashion and artistic expression. Alistair didn't know her as the woman betrayed at the V&A. To him, she was simply an exceptional artist whose work deserved recognition. He talked about an exhibition he was organizing on the evolution of fashion as art, and asked if she would consider participating. For the first time in months, Celeste felt seen and valued for who she really was, not for the tragedy she had lived. Alistair was intelligent, cultured, and well-traveled. He had studied in London, worked in New York, and now ran one of Milan's most respected galleries. But most importantly, he treated her as an equal, as a serious artist, not as a fragile woman who needed protection. When they said goodbye that night, they exchanged professional cards. Over the following weeks, they maintained an email correspondence about art, philosophy, and travel. Alistair would send photographs of exhibitions he visited, and she would share sketches of new creations. It was a pure intellectual connection, with no romantic pressure, no expectations beyond the exchange of interesting ideas. It was this friendship that made Celeste realize how much she had changed. 6 months ago, she would have analyzed every gesture from Alistair, scrutinized every word, looking for signs of romantic interest. Now, she simply appreciated the intellectual company, with no need to turn it into anything more. The exhibition Alistair organized, Fashion as Manifesto, took place in a historic gallery in downtown Milan. 5 of Celeste's creations were displayed alongside pieces by iconic designers like Vivienne Westwood and Jean-Paul Gaultier. Each dress was presented as a sculpture, dramatically lit, accompanied by texts that explained the philosophy behind the creation. The opening of the exhibition was an absolute success. Art critics, collectors, and international fashion personalities attended. Celeste circulated the event with a confidence that surprised even herself. She was no longer a successful businesswoman trying to prove her worth. She was a recognized artist, celebrating her work in one of the most important cultural centers in Europe. During the opening, she had a remarkable conversation with a young Italian art journalist. "Your pieces convey a very particular strength," the young woman commented, "as if each dress carries a story of overcoming." "Perhaps they do," Celeste replied, smiling. "I believe we create from what we live, and I have lived some very intense experiences in recent months." "And have those experiences changed you as an artist?" Celeste thought about the question for a moment. "They made me discover that I am much stronger than I imagined, and that true art is born from authenticity, not from the attempt to please others." That night, back in her hotel room, Celeste looked in the mirror and finally recognized the woman she saw there. It was herself, but an improved, refined version, strengthened by adversity. She had the same face, the same body, but there was something completely different in her eyes. There was power. There was serenity. There was the certainty of someone who knows exactly who they are and what they are capable of. She picked up the phone and did something she hadn't done in months. She called her mother. "Mom," she said. When her mother answered, "I want you to know that I'm okay. Better than okay. I'm whole." On the other end of the line, her mother cried. They were tears of relief from a woman who had spent months worrying about her eldest daughter, fearing that the betrayal she had suffered would leave her scarred forever. "My daughter," her mother whispered. "I always knew you were the strongest of us all. I was just waiting for you to discover it too." Celeste smiled, looking out the hotel window at the streets of Milan, illuminated by the night. "I did discover it, Mom, and I can guarantee you I will never again allow anyone to make me forget it." Part 6. The Ultimate Victory. A year and a half after the gala at the V&A, Celeste was back in London for the most ambitious launch of her career. London Fashion Week had reserved for her the most coveted time slot, the official opening of the calendar at the V&A. The same place where she had experienced her greatest humiliation would become the stage for her greatest victory. The irony was not lost on anyone in the fashion industry. The event organizers had made the choice deliberately, knowing that Celeste Dupont's story had become legendary in European cultural circles. She was no longer just a successful designer. She had become a symbol of reinvention, an inspiration for women who had gone through similar betrayals. The collection's theme was liberation, 24 pieces that told the story of the evolution of women's liberation throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. Each creation represented a decade, showing how women had gradually gained their financial, social, sexual, and emotional independence. It was a deeply personal collection, but with a universal appeal that transcended cultures and generations. Celeste had worked for 8 months in preparation for this show, not just on the clothes, which were obviously extraordinary, but on every detail of the production. The soundtrack was created especially for the event by an award-winning French composer. The models were chosen not only for their beauty, but for representing different ages, ethnicities, and lifestyles. The setting was a collaboration with an Italian visual artist who transformed the interior of the V&A into an immersive installation about the evolution of femininity. On the morning of the show, Celeste woke up in her apartment in Mayfair with a serenity that surprised her. She had expected to be nervous, anxious, and worried about the millions of details that could go wrong. Instead, she felt a profound peace, as if the entire journey since that traumatic night had been a preparation for this exact moment. She had her usual breakfast, strong espresso, almond croissants from a small neighborhood bakery, fresh fruit, while mentally reviewing every aspect of the show. At 9 in the morning, her private driver picked her up to take her to the V&A. It was the same route she had taken 18 months before, but this time she was a completely different woman. The V&A was unrecognizable. The production team had worked for 3 days to transform the space into an environment that seemed suspended in time. Soft lights created an ethereal atmosphere, while projections on the walls showed constantly transforming female silhouettes. The ambient sound was almost meditative, creating a sense of sanctity that made those present speak in whispers. The global fashion elite was there. Anna Wintour occupied the front row, alongside editors from the main European magazines. Buyers from major international stores had flown from New York, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo, especially for the event. Celebrities, socialites, and personalities from the arts and culture filled the other rows. More than 600 people were waiting for the start of the season's most anticipated show. Backstage, Celeste circulated among the models with the calm of a maestro about to conduct a symphony. She personally checked every detail, the fit of each piece, the makeup of each model, the timing of each entrance. Her assistants commented to each other about her transformation. The nervous and perfectionist woman of before had given way to a serene and confident leader. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the lights went out. The V&A plunged into absolute silence. And then, the first note of the soundtrack echoed through the space. It was a sound that began almost imperceptibly, like a whisper, and gradually grew in intensity and complexity. The first model appeared. She walked slowly, almost floating, wearing a creation that represented the 1920s, an era when women cut their hair, shortened their skirts, and claimed the right to smoke and drive cars. Celeste's dress perfectly captured the spirit of that decade. Elegant, yet rebellious. Sophisticated, yet provocative. Model after model, decade after decade, the story of female liberation unfolded on the runway. The 1940s were represented by an outfit inspired by the women who worked in factories during the war. The 1960s brought a psychedelic piece that celebrated the sexual revolution. The 1980s showcased a power suit that symbolized women's entry into the corporate world. But it was the creations representing the 2000s and 2020s that had the greatest impact. Two absolutely stunning pieces that spoke of the contemporary woman. Independent, complex, capable of being simultaneously vulnerable and strong, romantic and pragmatic, ambitious and maternal. The audience was mesmerized. It wasn't just a fashion show. It was an emotional, almost spiritual experience. Several people were seen discreetly wiping away tears. The soundtrack, the creations, the choreography, everything combined to create a powerful narrative about the female journey over a century. And then came the final moment. Celeste appeared on the runway. She wore a creation of her own, a dress that had taken 2 months to finish, representing the woman of the future. It was simultaneously futuristic and timeless, incorporating traditional sewing techniques with innovative materials that changed color depending on the angle of the light. But it wasn't the dress that held everyone's attention. It was Celeste. She walked with an absolute grace, radiating a confidence that magnetized every person present. There was no rush, no anxiety, just a woman who knew exactly who she was and was proud to be it. When she reached the end of the runway, she stopped and smiled. It wasn't a professional or rehearsed smile. It was a genuine smile from someone who was living the exact moment she had always dreamed of living. The audience erupted in applause that lasted more than 3 minutes, a standing ovation that made the V&A vibrate. But what happened next surprised even Celeste. The models began to return to the runway, one by one, not following the original choreography, but spontaneously. And when they were all gathered at the end of the runway, something magical happened. They began to applaud too, not for the audience, but for Celeste. It was a recognition among women, a tribute from professionals who had participated in hundreds of shows, but who recognized that this one had been different. It had been about all of them, about their struggles, their victories, their transformations. Alistair Cross, who had flown from Milan especially for the event, was in the 3rd row with tears in his eyes. In the months since their initial meeting, he and Celeste had developed a deep friendship based on mutual respect and intellectual admiration. He had followed her journey closely, witnessed her transformation, and knew better than anyone how much that moment represented. After the show, the reception took place in the V&A itself. Champagne, canapés prepared by one of London's best chefs, and a string quartet playing special arrangements of French classics. Celeste circulated the event, receiving congratulations from people she had admired for decades in the fashion industry. Anna Wintour approached her with a rare smile. "Celeste," she said, "this was one of the most moving shows I have witnessed in 30 years of my career. You didn't just show clothes. You told a story that needed to be told. Editors of international magazines lined up to speak with her. Buyers offered exclusive contracts for her creations. Renowned photographers asked for permission to do special shoots with her pieces. In a single night, Celeste had cemented her position not just as a successful designer, but as one of the most important voices in contemporary fashion. But the most significant moment of the night happened when she was on the V&A's external balcony, enjoying a few minutes of silence after hours of intense conversations. Alistair approached, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "How do you feel?" he asked, offering her one of the glasses. Celeste looked at the illuminated Satsumort city in front of her. Cromwell Road glowed with its characteristic lights. Traffic flowed in its hypnotic nightly patterns, and she could see the silhouettes of the monuments that had witnessed her entire journey. "Do you know what the strangest feeling is?" she replied, taking a sip of the champagne. "I don't feel anger. For a long time I thought I would be angry forever. Angry at Lucienne, at Mireille, at the whole situation. But today, looking at all this, I just feel gratitude." Alistair raised an eyebrow. "Gratitude? If that terrible night hadn't happened, I would have never discovered what I am capable of. I would still be living a half-life, defining myself through my relationships with others, without ever having tested my own limits." She paused, watching a young couple walking hand in hand on the sidewalk below. The betrayal was the cruelest and most necessary gift anyone ever gave me. "And what about them? Do you know what happened to Lucienne and Mireille?" Celeste smiled, a serene and dispassionate smile. "I found out from my parents, who haven't spoken to Mireille in months. Apparently they discovered that building a relationship on betrayal creates a very fragile foundation." She showed neither satisfaction nor sadness in relating the fact. It was as if she were talking about characters from a book she had read a long time ago. "Lucien tried to contact me a few times," she continued. "He sent emails, showed up at the atelier, wanting to apologize, to explain, maybe to try and reconcile." She laughed softly, but I had nothing left to say to him, not out of anger or resentment, but simply because that story had ended for me. I had moved on so completely that going back would be impossible. Alistair watched her with admiration. "You really have become a different person." "Not different," she corrected. "I have always been this person. I was just hidden under layers of insecurity, fear, and the need for approval. The betrayal acted like a fire that burned away everything that was superficial and left only the essential." They remained in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching London breathe around them. It was a city that had witnessed millions of stories of love, betrayal, redemption, and triumph. Just another night, another story being written. "Alistair," Celeste said suddenly, "thank you for believing in me when I didn't always believe in myself." "I just recognized what was always there," he replied. "The talent, the strength, the intelligence. All of that was yours long before that night at the V&A." Celeste turned to him, and for a moment, something different passed between them. It wasn't the first time she had realized that Alistair felt more than professional admiration for her. But now, for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of opening a space in her life for something new. "You know," she said, "for a long time, I thought I would have to choose between being a successful artist and having a full personal life, as if they were incompatible. And now I know I can have everything I want, as long as it's with the right people, for the right reasons." She looked him directly in the eyes. "People who love me for who I am, not for who they want me to be." Alistair took a step closer. "And what kind of person are you, Celeste Dupont?" "I'm a woman who builds empires," she replied without hesitation. "Who turns pain into art. Who doesn't apologize for taking up space in the world. Who loves deeply, but who will never again allow herself to be diminished by anyone." "That's exactly the woman I fell in love with," Alistair whispered, finally verbalizing what they both had known for months. Celeste smiled, a smile different from all the others she had given that night. It was a smile of someone who was ready to write a new chapter, but this time with complete awareness of her own strength. "Then maybe it's time for us to start a new story," she replied. "One where we both know exactly who we are and what we want." When they kissed, right there on the V&A balcony with London sparkling at their feet, it wasn't the desperate kiss of someone trying to fill a void. It was the serene kiss of two complete people who chose to share their completeness. 3 hours later, as the reception came to an end, Celeste took one last walk through the empty V&A. Her teams had dismantled the entire production with military efficiency. The special lights had been turned off, the projections had stopped, and the flowers had been removed. The space had returned to being just a historic building, waiting for the next event it would host. But for Celeste, that place would always be the landmark of her greatest transformation. There, she had been publicly humiliated. And there, she had achieved her greatest professional triumph. The cycle was complete. She picked up her phone and made a call she had been putting off for months. "Mireille," she said when her sister answered, clearly surprised by the call. "Celeste?" Mireille's voice sounded uncertain, almost fearful. "I want you to know that I forgive you," Celeste said without preamble. "Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace." Silence on the other end of the line. "You did me a favor," Celeste continued. "You forced me to discover a strength I didn't know I had. For that, strangely, I am grateful to you." "Celeste, Mireille tried to say something, but her voice failed. "You don't have to say anything. I'm not calling to hear excuses or explanations. I'm calling to close this chapter for good. You made your choices. I made mine. Now we can go on with completely separate lives in peace. And as for our family, that's between you and them. I'm no longer going to carry the weight of other people's relationships. Everyone is responsible for the bridges they build or burn." Celeste hung up the phone and took a deep breath. She was officially free. Free from anger, resentment, and the need for revenge. Free to be exactly who she had chosen to become. 6 months later, Celeste opened her first flagship store in New York. The store occupied 3 floors of a historic building in Soho, and there was a line 2 blocks long at the grand opening. Alistair had moved to New York to run a contemporary art gallery, and they lived together in a spectacular loft with a view of Central Park. But this is not a story about a new relationship. It's a story about a woman who learned to love herself completely, who discovered she didn't need amour to anyone to be happy, and who, because of that, was finally ready to share her happiness with someone who deserved her. Subscribe to the channel to follow more stories of overcoming adversity. Celeste's story teaches us that sometimes the greatest betrayals are, paradoxically, the greatest gifts we can receive. Not because betrayal is desirable, but because it forces us to confront truths about ourselves and our relationships that we might never have faced voluntarily. When someone betrays us, we are forced to question not only the person who betrayed us, but also the person we were within that relationship. We often discover that we were living diminished versions of ourselves, that we had given up important parts of our identity in the name of a love that, in truth, was not as unconditional as we imagined. True liberation does not come from revenge or resentment. It comes from the understanding that we deserve relationships based on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine admiration. It comes from the discovery of our own strength and our own ability to create happiness, regardless of the actions of others. Celeste never went back. She never forgave the traitor in the sense of re-establishing the relationship. She never returned to him. Her ultimate victory was much more powerful. She transcended the need for any of those things. She found her completeness within herself, and only then did she allow herself to love again. But this time from a place of strength, not of need. This is the most important message of her journey. We don't need anyone to complete us. We are already whole. And when we understand this deeply, we attract people who are also whole. And together, we create not a dependency, but a mutual celebration of two ill existences. The greatest revenge against those who betrayed us is not to destroy them, but to become so extraordinarily happy that their betrayal becomes irrelevant in the grandness of our new life. It is to show, through example, that their cruel choices were, in fact, the catalyst for our greatest transformation. Celeste. Dupont turned the most humiliating night of her life into the first day of her true freedom. And in that lies the transformative power of a woman's dignity. Our ability to be reborn from our own ashes, stronger, wiser, and more radiant than we ever were before. The truly free woman is the one who has discovered she doesn't need anyone to be happy, and who, because of that, can choose with whom she wants to share her happiness.